Security experts, we're thrilled to have Ray Kelly, former commissioner of the New York Police Department, who just left the NYPD as the longest-serving commissioner in its history. Our senior justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, and Colonel Steve Ganyard is an ABC News contributor and a former Marine Corps commander and State Department official. Ray Kelly, I want to start with you. You've prepared New York City for so many events. Times Square at New Year's, huge security challenges. The last attempted bombing, the Times Square bombing. When you see what's happening in Sochi, what lessons can you provide on how you would do it? What you would do differently, or what they're doing now that you think is working?
Well, so far, so good. It looks like they've done detailed planning. Obviously, the Russians had 7 years to plan for this, but I would suspect that right now they're still adjusting that plan because it's a dynamic process. The intelligence assessment, of course, is very important here, and that drives a lot of what you do as far as the planning is concerned. And we know that the major threat is from these Muslim terrorists who are in the North Caucasus republics. And we have Doko Umarov as this individual who's threatened to upset the games. So it looks to me like they've done everything that they can do. They've devoted probably as many as 100,000 people. The numbers are anywhere from 40 to 100,000. But I kind of think it's on the upper side.
Can they prevent an attack, do you believe?
Well, I think they can prevent an attack probably in the venue itself. Obviously, as has been said, I think outside of the area of Sochi, there is a risk of an attack. But I think the Russians, they have the tools. I mean, they're listening in on everything going on, certainly in the Sochi area. They sure are.
We hear a lot of stories about that.
Right. So I think they're doing everything that they think they can do. Pierre,
I want to ask you about this ring of steel. We see a map, looks a little more like a rectangle of steel to me. But what does that really mean? Is it a combination of barriers, guards? What?
Exactly. It's 1,500 miles, combination of barbed wire fence, as Ray said, 50 to 100,000 security personnel, but also surveillance cameras, surveillance drones. They also have gunboats in the Black Sea, so they're prepared, at least on the outer ring, for anything to block it from getting through. And again, the concern is Islamic fundamentalists trying to get into the Olympic venue.
Steve Ganyard, I asked the congressman about this and evacuating Americans. You've worked in disaster relief in your Marine Corps career, running several exercises for earthquakes and other kinds of even terrorist attacks. Are you confident we could get those athletes out of there quickly?
Not confident. One of the things I think was most disturbing to the U.S. government is when the U.S. Embassy ran a simulation back in December and said, what if they're unable to prevent a terrorist attack? How will the Russians deal with that? And the embassy got quite nervous because they found huge deficiencies in the Russian ability to do medical, to do evacuations, to have communications, to do interoperability. So I think there's a real concern that the Russians have put too much emphasis on prevention and not enough on what happens if something actually happens on the ground. It's almost as if they'd been told, okay, you might play in a big football game, so here are all the people on the field, but you're not going to let them practice. You're not going to let them run a play. You just have to go do it if it happens.
Let's talk about what we have in the area, though. We have 2 ships in the Black Sea. We have C-17 standing by in Germany. Can those ships not help? Can those airplanes not help if there's an evacuation?
It's really a token force. The kinds of ships that we have, the 2 ships we have a small frigate that may have 1 helicopter on board that's designed for anti-submarine. It's not designed for rescue. It's not designed for medical evacuation. We have a command and control ship that's very capable. You could run an evacuation, but it's not per se a warship. We do have the C-17s up at Ramstein in Germany that could be there within 6 hours. But think about what it would entail. If we had a helicopter on one of those ships and they try to get into Sochi after something happens, who's going to get them in through the anti-aircraft batteries? Who's going to get them on the ground? We don't speak Russian.
Language has to be. Right. Just very quickly, Steve, are there things going on that we don't know about? You've been in government.
I'm sure there are, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be successful. We have been blocked and stopped by the Russians at every attempt to coordinate any kind of prior response. You can't just go in and, if something happens, be handing out business cards when it happens.
Pierre, the concerns about sharing intelligence that the congressman also talked about, the Russians just aren't giving up much.
Well, I talked to a senior official in law enforcement last night who said, you know, it's their house. and then we have to play by their rules. The official said, think about Salt Lake City. If something were to happen in Salt Lake City, we weren't going to allow a bunch of Russians running around with weapons to do anything. So he said, we're getting some information, not as much as they would like. But the key, he said, is this prickly issue of sources and methods. They don't want us to know how they're getting their information, and we don't necessarily want them to know how we're getting our information. So that is part of the problem.
Ray Kelly, I want to talk about letting our guard down. You heard Christine Brennan. Everything's going so well now. You've seen so many terror alerts. You've tried to keep a city vigilant. How do you do that? How do you make sure they don't take for granted that things are going well?
Yeah, I think there is a concern in that regard. The Olympics go to February 23rd. It's a long way off. Actually, there's Paralympics that go into March. So, yes, the adrenaline is flowing now the first few days. But the attack in 1972 at the Munich Olympics didn't happen until 9 days into the Olympics. So it's an issue. As I say, the fatigue factor is important.
And that's when a terrorist would strike during the fatigue factor.
Yeah, you have to rotate people. You have to make certain that their energy level is up. But we had 12-hour work shifts here, you know, when there's a big event, and it's very debilitating. So it's something that the Russians have to look at closely. And you need your leadership to keep people on guard and keep them alert.
And what scares you now most is that attack outside of the venue.
Yeah, I think that's the consensus of the intelligence community, that the Sochi area is pretty well locked down, and if anything happens, it's going to happen away from Sochi.
Okay, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us this morning.